Now, what makes this different, as I mentioned, trying to apply the trauma lens to a more sympathetic crowd that usually doesn't get that. And also the way we've structured our manual. The Strong Families is a manualized therapy model, as I'll go over as we work together. Um, it's not a script and we're not robots, right? They're parameters and talking points that are organized in a structured way. And that's the art and science of having talking points and techniques that have been proven to be effective with the general population, with the art of it, which is how do you do it for that individual sitting in front of you. You look at a picture like this, what impression do you get? Multicolored hair, got the hoodie on. You can even, you can even interpret certain things, trying to talk to her and she on her phone, and my God, kids definitely on their phone constantly, constantly. And that was before COVID, y'all, right? So it's like, oh my goodness, you're fighting with the adolescents to get their attention, to get them to comply. And think about in the beginning when we're first trying to engage them, they're coming to a treatment place that they may not have asked for nor initiated themselves. So you're talking about defiant, and you're talking about the battle, right? I want to recognize that there are a few things we could do. We could have some talking points, some engagement strategies that are in our toolkit. And that's where the manualized treatment comes from. We start a place, but the art of it is how you apply it to this individual versus the young woman who's in the other slide versus some of the clients that you see across your day. We also focus on gang involvement. Now, I like to say our manual and my approach includes working with not only people who've been perpetrators, but also people who've been survivors of interpersonal violence. And often, as you know, that includes the same person with the same experience. People are constantly in those battles. We've had some famous incidents like the King Von situation and others. You all probably just heard about P&B Rock. I use some of the pop culture references when you're talking to the young people where people are losing their lives. We know Chief Keef stories and all the other situations. But there's also been all those young people who never make the newspaper. They're not famous. They're not singers. They're not in the media. They're just as important, and they're going through these same sieges. And often when you go to protect yourself, you have to adopt the means that's been used against you. So they may join a crew, right? And I have a little clip I'm going to show as part of an assessment exemplar I'd like to get your feedback on, and we can kind of chop that up a bit. So gang involvement is a big thing because that's an extreme expression of disruptive behavior disorder. But it's also an expression of wanting to be connected and having an affiliation with peers. So there's that whole strength stressor balance. There's individual, family, group, and community strengths that we keep in mind as cultural sensitivity. Now, how many of you feel like there's certain specific things we need to adapt to people based on their cultural context? So how many of you will keep in mind, I'm talking to a self-identified female versus a self-identified male versus someone who's kind of struggling with their identity, right? Do you want to keep in mind, I'm dealing with someone from a historic 3-generation African-American family versus this is a recent immigrant who's coming from Afghanistan, or here's someone who has links to Mexico or Bolivia or Ecuador or these, and we know the Latinx diaspora is not all the same, right? Let alone I have Haitian immigrants. So you have these different constituencies, right? And actually my protocol I use, we deal with people not only in Chicago and the Chicagoland area, but around the country. So like surprisingly, probably 75, 80% of my population that I deal with my interventions are all Latinx and Spanish speaking out in Oakland. So we have to stay on our toes. And that includes a set of let me say, folks who have to navigate and negotiate the border. So I can't just throw robot scripts at those families. So we want to keep in mind that cultural context, right? We also want to keep in mind, and we don't take this personal, it may take a session or two to engage our young people. maybe a session or 3 or 4 or 5, because they may not have had the best contact with the mental health system, the health system, or the youth service system. How many of you have had clients who have undergone at least one hospitalization? Okay. How many of you have had those who have dealt with child protection? Okay. How about juvenile justice? Okay. And I like to joke, but not joke, because you laugh not to cry. Some of my kids have cases open on both sides at the same time. They've gone through the child protection of the abuse neglect issues which they're navigating, while they also have been arrested for doing different things. So they have cases open on both sides of the court simultaneously. So I'm keeping in mind when I walk in, as enthusiastic as that may be, I still have to show and prove where I'm coming from. And I'll say this, and I won't dwell on it. Not only do we ask about biopsychosocial history, we ask about psychiatric, psychological, and social work history, meaning, have they talked to a therapist before? What was that experience like? What did they like about it? What didn't they like about it? What did they prefer that their therapist did and the way they talked to them? What turned them off? How did they work with the family? So when they see us, that's all part of the history / baggage that we may have to overcome as mental health providers, even when we mean well and don't plan on replicating some of those, I'll call them microaggressions, mental health microaggressions. Does that make sense to folks? I hope I'm not being too blunt. I tend to just talk very directly, and my goals are we talk very openly so we can get things done and maybe do things differently. The last thing is restorative justice. How many of you, if anyone has been trained or has used restorative justice circles and models? I tend to think restorative justice, and I work with a group out in Oakland that says restorative justice is not for the courts. Restorative practices can be a basis of youth programming for prevention as well as intervention. So we bring in that circle mentality, even when you're working with the individual. It's that sharing, caring, the rituals. You can use your talking pieces. You can do all the things that you've been trained on restorative justice, and you could do it with families. You could do it individuals, and you definitely could do it when you're working with the youth groups. And last but not least, I bring in the rap and hip hop, which I can share once we get our foundations in place. But we name drop, and we want to stay current with things that are attractive to our young people. I'll ask y'all a quick aside. Anybody like the Bears? I personally, let me see how I want to say this. I personally am not a Bears fan. I'm a Raider fan for the last almost 40 years. But you can believe I learned about the Bears when I got here to get my kids' attention and to talk about things which were happening with the Bears and the Bulls that were teachable moments, because those are things that my kids were interested in. Does that make sense? So whatever you can connect to, whatever makes them tick, like TikTok or whatever it may be, we want to bring that in because we want to get their attention. And these are teachable, practical things that we can use.